I am standing in a courtroom at 67 years old, watching my only son testify that I'm a selfish, heartless mother who refuses to help her family. His lawyer just presented documents, claiming I promised him $600,000. My hands are shaking as I stare at my signature on papers I've never seen before. The judge is looking at me like I'm the villain. My son won't meet my eyes. This is the boy I raised alone after his father died. How did we get here? Let me take you back 3 months to where this nightmare really began. I was living a quiet, simple life in my modest ranch home in suburban Cleveland, Ohio. After 43 years teaching high school math, I'd retired 2 years earlier with what I considered a comfortable nest egg. Not wealthy by any means, but enough to feel secure. My husband passed away 28 years ago when our son Tyler was just 7 years old, a heart attack at 39. One day he was here, the next he was gone. I raised Tyler on my own from that point forward, working full-time while managing everything a single parent manages. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. I lived carefully. My house was paid off, a small 3-bedroom ranch I'd bought with the life insurance money. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that ran just fine. I clipped coupons, bought store brands, and hadn't taken a real vacation in over a decade. But I'd saved. Lord, how I'd saved. Every paycheck, I put money away. First for Tyler's future, then for my own. By the time I retired, I had $847,000 across various retirement accounts, plus my Social Security. I'd calculated it all carefully. If I was frugal, if I stayed healthy, if nothing catastrophic happened, I could make it to 90 without running out of money. That was my security blanket. That number represented every sacrifice, every extra shift, every time I said no to myself so I could say yes to the future. Tyler had turned out well, or so I thought. He was 35, married for 8 years to a woman named Stephanie. He worked in pharmaceutical sales and made decent money, around $90,000 a year. Stephanie came from a wealthy family in Atlanta. Her father was some kind of corporate lawyer. They'd helped Tyler and Stephanie with their wedding, which had been far fancier than anything I could have afforded. I'd contributed $5,000, which had nearly cleaned out my checking account at the time, but I'd wanted to help. They lived in a nice apartment in Columbus, about 2 hours from me. We talked every couple of weeks, saw each other on holidays. It was a normal mother and son relationship, I thought. That Tuesday in July, when Tyler called saying he and Stephanie wanted to visit, I was thrilled. They didn't come by often. I cleaned the house, made Tyler's favorite pot roast, set out fresh flowers from my garden. When they arrived, Tyler seemed nervous. He kept checking his phone, wouldn't quite look at me directly. Stephanie looked excited, almost giddy. She was wearing designer clothes, carrying a purse I knew cost more than my monthly grocery budget. We sat down to dinner and made small talk. Tyler asked about my health, my friends, whether I was enjoying retirement. I told him I was thinking about volunteering at the library, maybe taking up watercolor painting. Normal conversation. Then, just as I was clearing the plates, Tyler cleared his throat in that way he did when he had something important to say. "Mom, Stephanie and I have some incredible news," he said, pulling out his phone. "We bought our dream home." I stopped midway to the kitchen, plates still in my hands. "Oh? That's wonderful, honey. Where?" "Hilton Head, South Carolina," Stephanie chimed in, practically bouncing in her seat. "Beachfront. It's absolutely gorgeous." Tyler started showing me photos on his phone. The house was stunning, I had to admit. 4 bedrooms, wraparound deck, infinity pool overlooking the ocean, a private dock. The kind of place you see in magazines, not the kind of place people like us actually lived in. "It's beautiful," I said honestly, setting the plates down and coming back to look closer. "But Hilton Head? That's pretty far from Columbus. What about your job, Tyler?" "I can work remotely a few days a week," he said quickly. "And we're keeping the apartment for now. This is more of an investment property, a place to build equity." Something felt off, but I tried to be supportive. "Well, congratulations. I'm sure you two will be very happy there. How did you manage the financing? Those waterfront properties must cost a fortune." Tyler's smile faltered slightly. Stephanie's excitement dimmed. They exchanged a look, one of those married couple looks that communicates entire conversations. "That's actually what we wanted to talk to you about," Tyler said slowly. He reached into a leather messenger bag I hadn't noticed him carrying and pulled out a manila folder. He slid it across my kitchen table toward me. We got creative with the financing. I opened the folder with a growing sense of unease. Inside were mortgage documents. My reading glasses were in the other room, but I could make out the numbers clearly enough. $600,000. 30-year fixed rate. And there, in the borrower line, I saw my name. "What is this?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. "Mom, listen," Tyler started, leaning forward. "You've been saving your whole life. You've got over $800,000 sitting in retirement accounts. Your house is paid off. You get Social Security. You have more money than you could ever spend. Tyler, that money is for my retirement. That's not extra money. That's what I need to live on for potentially the next 20 or 30 years. Stephanie leaned in, her voice saccharine sweet. "Gail, my parents helped us with the down payment. We put in $100,000. It's only fair that your contribution matches what family does. This is what parents do. They help their children build their futures." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I'm sorry, what? You expect me to take out a $600,000 mortgage? At my age? With my income?" "Not take it out," Tyler corrected. "Just pay it. The mortgage is already finalized. We used your financial information from when you helped me with my student loan refinancing a few years ago. We just need you to start making the monthly payments. It's only $4,000 a month. You can easily afford that." My head was spinning. $4,000 a month, Tyler? I live on less than $3,000 a month total. My entire budget. Everything. And you want me to pay $4,000 just for your mortgage? "You'd need to adjust your lifestyle," Stephanie said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Downsize maybe? You don't need a 3-bedroom house for just yourself. Sell it, move into a small apartment. Use that equity. You've been hoarding money for years, Gail. What's the point of having it if you won't use it for family?" I looked at Tyler, searching his face for the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd sat up with when he had nightmares after his father died, the boy I'd driven to soccer practice and helped with algebra homework and sent to college. "Tyler, I can't do this. I'm sorry, but no. That money is my security. I worked my entire life for it." His face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "We're not asking for all of it, just enough to help us get started. You still have the house, you still have plenty left over. Don't you want to see me succeed?" "I do want that. Of course I do. But not like this. I can help you with a small amount, maybe $10,000 as a housewarming gift. But I can't commit to a mortgage that size. It would drain my savings in just a few years." Stephanie let out a bitter laugh. "10,000? That's insulting. We're talking about your son's future. Our future. We want to start a family soon. We need the space, the stability. Then you need to buy something you can actually afford," I said, my voice shaking now. "I'm sorry, but my answer is no." Tyler stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against my linoleum floor. "You know what, Mom? I should have known. You've always been like this. Remember when I wanted to go to that computer camp in 8th grade, and you said it was too expensive? Or when all my friends got new cars at 16, and you made me drive your old beater? Or when I had to take out student loans because you wouldn't pay for all of college? Tyler, I was a single mother on a teacher's salary. I did the best I could. You had insurance money from Dad's death. You could have used that to give me a better life, but you hoarded it, just like you're hoarding it now." Tears were streaming down my face. "That money kept a roof over our heads and food on the table. I used it to raise you, to keep us stable. How dare you throw that in my face?" Stephanie grabbed her purse. "We should go. Clearly, she's not going to be reasonable." They headed for the door. I followed them, desperate to make them understand. "Please, Tyler, don't leave like this. We can talk about ways I can help that don't involve destroying my financial security." He paused at the door, turned back to look at me with eyes that had gone cold. "You're going to regret this, Mom. Family has ways of making things right. Stephanie's father is a lawyer. We know our options." And then they were gone. I stood in my doorway, watching their car pull away, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just anger talking, that he'd cool down, we'd work it out. Tyler was my son, my only child. He wouldn't really do anything to hurt me. I was so wrong. For 2 weeks after that disastrous dinner, I heard nothing from Tyler. I called, Left voicemails. I texted. I got no response. I tried telling myself he just needed time to process his disappointment, that eventually he'd understand I was doing what I needed to do to protect myself. That's what I told myself when I couldn't sleep at night, when my mind replayed the anger in his voice over and over. Then Rachel called. Rachel was my late husband's sister, 59 years old, and one of the few family connections I had left on his side. We talked maybe once a month, exchanged Christmas cards. She'd always been fond of Tyler. "Gail," she said when I answered, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. "I need to understand what's going on with you and Tyler." "What did he tell you?" I asked, my stomach dropping. "He called me yesterday. He was very upset. He said you promised to help him and Stephanie with a major family investment, and now you're refusing despite having plenty of money. He said you told him you'd rather spend your savings on cruises and luxuries than help your own son. That's not true. That's not what happened at all." "Then what did happen?" "Because Tyler was nearly in tears, Gail. He said you turned your back on him when he needed you most." I explained everything: the beach house, the mortgage papers, the expectation that I'd pay $4,000 a month indefinitely. The fact that they'd already bought the house without even asking me first. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "That does sound extreme," she admitted. "But Tyler said you'd been talking for years about helping him when he was ready to make a big investment. He said you promised." "I never promised anything like that. Maybe I said someday I'd like to help if I could, but not $600,000. Rachel, that's my entire retirement." "I don't know, Gail." Her voice had that edge of doubt. "Why would Tyler lie? What would he have to gain? He's your son. Maybe you said something years ago and forgot about it. People do make promises and forget." After we hung up, I felt sick. Rachel didn't believe me. My own sister-in-law thought I was either lying or senile. That was just the beginning. Over the next week, I started noticing changes in how people treated me. At church that Sunday, during the coffee hour after service, a group of women I'd known for 15 years gave me cold looks when I approached. Agnes, who lived 2 houses down from me, and who I'd driven to doctor's appointments when her hip was bad, actually turned away when she saw me coming. I finally cornered my friend Patricia, a woman I'd taught with for 20 years before she retired. "What's going on?" I asked her. "Why is everyone acting so strange?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Gail, I don't want to get involved, but people are talking. They're saying you came into some family money, and you're refusing to share it with Tyler even though he's struggling." "I didn't come into any money. And Tyler isn't struggling. He makes good money." "That's not what I heard. I heard he and his wife are barely making ends meet, and you have nearly $1 million but won't help them." She paused. "Look, I don't know what the truth is, and I'm not judging. But you know how people talk." I realized then what Tyler and Stephanie were doing. They were spreading lies about me, poisoning my reputation, turning people against me, making me look like a wealthy miser who was abandoning her struggling son. Every time I tried to correct the story, people looked at me with skepticism. Why would a son lie about his own mother? I must be the one who was wrong. The isolation was crushing. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. I'd go to the grocery store and see people I knew avoiding eye contact. At my book club meeting, the host said maybe I should skip the next few weeks until things calmed down. Nobody wanted to hear my side. They'd already decided I was the villain. Then came the night that broke something in me. It was 11:30 on a Tuesday when my phone rang. Tyler's name on the screen. My heart leaped. Maybe he was calling to apologize, to fix things. "Mom?" His voice was panicked, scared. "Mom, you need to come to Riverside Hospital right away. It's Stephanie. She's in the emergency room." "What happened? Is she okay?" "Just come, please. We need you." I threw on clothes, grabbed my purse, drove 90 miles an hour down Route 71 to Columbus. My mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. An accident. A sudden illness. My daughter-in-law, whatever our differences, might be seriously hurt. I was shaking as I parked in the ER lot and ran inside. I found Tyler in the waiting room, sitting with his head in his hands. When he saw me, he stood up but didn't move toward me. "Where's Stephanie? What happened?" I asked breathlessly. "She's in the back. They're running tests." "Tests for what, Tyler? What's going on?" He looked at me, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, not sadness, something calculating. We thought she might be having a miscarriage. We just found out she was pregnant 2 weeks ago. But she started having pain tonight, bleeding. They're checking to see if the baby is okay. My anger at Tyler evaporated, replaced by genuine concern. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Stephanie came out from the back. She was walking normally, no blood, no signs of distress. She saw me and her face didn't register the shock or fear you'd expect from someone who might be losing a baby. She looked annoyed. "False alarm," she said flatly. "Everything's fine. The doctor said it was probably just implantation cramping. Very common." I looked from Stephanie to Tyler. "So the baby is okay?" "There is no baby," Stephanie said, pulling out her phone. "I'm not pregnant. I thought I might be, but the test at the hospital was negative." That's when it hit me. The panic in Tyler's voice, the emergency, the claim that they'd just found out she was pregnant. It was all a manipulation. They'd lured me here under false pretenses. "Since you're here," Tyler said, sitting back down and gesturing for me to join him, "we should really talk about the house situation. Mom, we're in deep trouble. The first mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks. We can't cover it. If you don't help us, we're going to lose the house. Stephanie's parents already put in so much. We thought we could count on you too." I stood up, my whole body shaking with anger and hurt. "You lied to me. You made me think there was a medical emergency to manipulate me into driving 2 hours in the middle of the night." "We needed to talk to you," Stephanie said, not even looking up from her phone. "You weren't taking our calls." "Because I'd already given you my answer." "No." I walked out of that hospital fighting back tears, drove the 2 hours home in a daze, and when I pulled into my driveway at 2 a.m, I saw it. Papers taped to my front door. Legal papers. Tyler had filed a lawsuit against me. The claim was for breach of oral contract. He was suing me for $600,000, claiming I had verbally promised him this money for family investment purposes and that he had relied on this promise to purchase the beach house. There were pages and pages of legal language I could barely understand. But the bottom line was clear. Court date set for 6 weeks away. He was actually doing this. My son was taking me to court. I sank down on my front steps and cried until the sun came up. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a phone book, trying to figure out what to do. I'd never been involved in any kind of legal trouble in my life, never even had a speeding ticket. The idea of going to court terrified me, but I had to protect myself. I called the first lawyer in the phone book. His secretary quoted me a consultation fee of $350 just to talk. When I explained what was happening, she said civil litigation cases like this typically required a retainer of at least $50,000. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. $50,000. That would take a huge chunk out of my savings just to defend myself against a false claim. I called 2 more lawyers. One wanted $45,000. Another said he didn't take cases against family members, that it was too messy. By the 3rd day, I was starting to panic. The court date was getting closer, and I still didn't have representation. Finally, I found Frank Porter. He was a small-time attorney who worked out of a converted house near downtown Cleveland. His office smelled like old coffee and dusty books. But when he sat down with me and listened to my story, he seemed genuinely sympathetic. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, leaning back in his creaky desk chair, "oral contracts are notoriously difficult to prove. Without documentation, your son has a very weak case. The burden of proof is on him to show that a contract existed, that there was consideration, and that you breached it. From what you're telling me, none of those elements are present. So you think I can win?" "I think his case will get thrown out in summary judgment before we even get to trial. But we need to be prepared just in case." He quoted me a retainer of $15,000. It was still a staggering amount, but it was the best I was going to find. I wrote him a check that afternoon, watching $15,000 of my carefully saved money disappear. Frank got to work immediately. He filed a response to the lawsuit denying all claims. He requested discovery, asking Tyler's legal team to provide any evidence of this alleged promise. I felt a little better. I had someone on my side now, someone who understood the law. But Tyler's legal team was not what I expected. When Frank came back to me 2 weeks later with discovery materials, His face was grim. "Your son hired Harold Brennan," he said, sliding papers across his desk toward me. "Who's that?" "He's Stephanie's father, and he's one of the top corporate attorneys in the state. His firm usually handles million-dollar business disputes. The fact that he's taking on a family case like this pro bono tells me they're very serious. And Mrs. Thompson, I have to be honest with you, he's way out of my league." My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means they have resources I can't match. They've already subpoenaed all of your financial records. They're deposing your friends and family. They're building a case that you had the means to help and chose not to. They're going to paint you as a wealthy woman who abandoned her son out of spite. Over the next few weeks, I watched my life get dissected by strangers. Harold Brennan's team pulled my bank statements, my retirement account statements, my tax returns. Every penny I'd ever saved was now on display. They deposed Patricia, my former teaching colleague. They deposed Rachel. They talked to my neighbors. And every conversation I'd ever had about wanting to help Tyler someday or being proud of my savings was being twisted into evidence that I'd made a promise. Then came the letter. Frank called me to his office, and when I arrived, he had a document in front of him. It looked old, the paper slightly yellowed. "They produced this in Discovery yesterday," he said. "Have you ever seen it before?" I picked up the paper and read. It was allegedly a letter from me to Tyler dated 3 years earlier. It said, "Dear Tyler, when you're ready to make your big investment, I'll be there with $600,000. It's what your father would have wanted. Love, Mom." The signature at the bottom looked like mine. The handwriting was eerily similar to mine. But I'd never written this letter. I'd never even thought about giving Tyler $600,000. "Frank, this is fake. I never wrote this." "Are you absolutely certain? Sometimes we forget things we wrote years ago." "I'm certain. Look at the paper. There's no envelope, no postmark, no address. It's just convenient that they have this letter right when they need it." Frank hired a handwriting expert. That cost me another $8,000. The expert examined the letter for 2 weeks and came back with his conclusion. The signature could be genuine, or it could be a skilled forgery. He couldn't say for certain. It was a possibility, not proof, but it was enough to make the case complicated, enough to prevent summary judgment. The case was going to trial. By this point, I'd spent $23,000 on legal fees. Money that was supposed to last me through retirement was disappearing at an alarming rate. The stress was affecting my health. I couldn't sleep. I'd lost 12 pounds. My blood pressure was so high my doctor put me on medication and warned me that the stress could cause a stroke. And then, 1 week before trial, Frank called me. His voice sounded strange, excited maybe, or nervous. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come to the office?" I drove over immediately. When I walked into his office, he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Harold Brennan offered me a job," he said quietly, "at his firm. A senior partner position. It's triple what I make now. It's the opportunity of a lifetime." I felt the room start to spin. "When would you start?" "That's the thing. He wants me to start immediately, which means I'd have to withdraw from your case. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I know the timing is terrible. But I can recommend another attorney, someone who can pick up where I left off." "Pick up where you left off?" "Frank, the trial is in 7 days. No attorney can prepare a case in 7 days." "I know. I'm sorry. But this opportunity, I can't pass it up. My wife and we've been struggling financially. This would change our lives." I understood then what had happened. Harold Brennan hadn't just offered Frank a job, he'd bought him. He'd removed my legal representation right before trial, leaving me essentially defenseless. And there was nothing I could do about it. I left Frank's office in a daze. I had 7 days to find a new lawyer, prepare for trial, and somehow defend myself against one of the best attorneys in the state. It felt impossible. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried until I couldn't breathe. I spent the next 3 days in pure panic, calling every attorney I could find. Most wouldn't take a case this close to trial. Those who had wanted retainers I couldn't afford. I was running out of options and time. Finally, on day 4, I met Beth Caldwell. She was only 31 years old, fresh out of law school, working at a tiny firm that mostly handled traffic tickets and small claims. When I explained my situation, She admitted she'd never handled a civil litigation case of this size, but she was willing to try. "Mrs. Thompson, I can't promise I'll win, but I'll work as hard as I can, and my retainer is only $5,000 because I'm just starting out." I hired her because I had no other choice. Beth dove into the case files Frank had left behind, working around the clock to try to get up to speed. She was earnest and kind, but I could see the fear in her eyes when she looked at the opposing counsel's materials. Harold Brennan had built a mountain of evidence, twisted truth into something that looked damning. 2 days before trial, Harold's team produced their witnesses. Tyler's college roommate from 15 years ago claimed that at graduation, he'd overheard me tell Tyler I'd take care of his future when the time came. A former colleague from my teaching career gave a deposition saying I'd talked frequently about wanting to fund Tyler's future. I recognized the words vaguely. I probably had said things like that, the way any parent talks about hoping to help their children. But they were twisting casual comments into contractual promises. And then Stephanie had her miscarriage. Or at least, that's what Harold's team claimed. They submitted medical records dated 2 weeks after the hospital incident, showing that Stephanie had been treated for a miscarriage. They claimed that the stress of my refusal to honor my promise had caused her to lose the baby. Now, I wasn't just a woman breaking a contract. I was a grandmother who'd caused the death of her own grandchild through her selfishness. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My blood pressure spiked so high that I ended up in the emergency room myself. The doctor who treated me, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 35, held my hand and said, "Whatever is happening in your life, it's not worth dying over. You need to find a way to reduce this stress." But how could I? If I lost this case, I'd lose everything. If I settled, I'd lose everything. There was no path forward that didn't end in my financial destruction. I seriously considered settling. Maybe I could offer $300,000. It would devastate my retirement, but I'd have something left. At least the nightmare would be over. But then I realized that even if I gave them half, Tyler wouldn't stop. There would be another demand, another crisis, another manipulation. And besides, I'd already spent $33,000 fighting this. I couldn't afford to both pay legal fees and settle. 3 days before trial, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Tyler isn't who you think he is." There was no name, just an anonymous email address. Inside was a link to a news article from 2 years earlier about a pharmaceutical company being investigated for bribing doctors to prescribe their medications. The article listed several employees who'd been questioned, though no charges were filed. Tyler's name was on that list. I forwarded it to Beth immediately. She dug deeper and found something interesting. Public records showed that Tyler and Stephanie had multiple bank accounts I didn't know about. They'd taken a vacation to Europe 4 months earlier that cost at least $50,000. Stephanie had purchased a $75,000 luxury car last year. These weren't people who were struggling. They were people who spent money freely and now wanted me to subsidize their lifestyle. But Harold Brennan had blocked access to Tyler's full financial records. We could see hints of wealth, but not the full picture. Beth filed motions to compel discovery, but with only days left, there wasn't time for the court to rule. Then, 2 days before trial, a letter arrived by courier. It was from Harold Brennan himself, on his firm's letterhead. "Dear Mrs. Thompson," it read, "this is your final opportunity to settle this matter amicably. If you agree to pay the full $600,000 by tomorrow at noon, we will dismiss the case. If you refuse, we will proceed with the trial. Additionally, we will be amending our complaint to include charges of elder abuse, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We will be seeking punitive damages. The total amount you will owe if we win at trial will be $1.2 million. Choose wisely." Beth came to my house that evening. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Tyler had first presented me with those mortgage papers, and she explained my options. "If they add those charges, Mrs. Thompson, we're in real trouble. Elder abuse, because Tyler claims he was caring for you and you're retaliating. Defamation, because you've told people his claims are false. Intentional infliction of emotional distress because of the alleged miscarriage. A jury might not buy all of it, but they might buy some of it. And if they do, you won't just lose your savings. They could put a lien on your house. Garnish your Social Security. You could lose everything. What do you think I should do?" Beth looked down at her hands. "Honestly, I think you should settle. I don't think we can win against Harold Brennan. He's too good, too experienced. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I wish I could give you better news." I sat there in my quiet house, the house I'd paid off through decades of careful saving, and I thought about giving Tyler everything. Thought about spending the last years of my life in poverty because I'd been too afraid to fight back. Thought about what that would teach him, what it would say about me. "No," I said finally. "I won't settle. I'd rather lose everything fighting than hand it over without a fight." Beth looked at me with something like admiration. "Then we go to trial tomorrow, and we do our absolute best." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd just made the worst decision of my life. Wondering if tomorrow I'd walk into a courtroom and lose everything I'd spent 67 years building. But somewhere around 4 in the morning, I found a strange sort of peace. Whatever happened, at least I'd know I stood up for myself, that I didn't let fear make my decisions. At 6 in the morning, I got up, showered, put on my best dress, the navy blue one I wore to weddings and funerals. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. I'd aged years in the past few months. But my eyes were clear. I was scared, but I was ready. It was time to face my son in court. The courthouse was a massive stone building in downtown Cleveland, all columns and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. Beth met me outside, carrying her briefcase and looking nervous but determined. We walked through security together, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, found courtroom 4B. Tyler and Stephanie were already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with Harold Brennan. Tyler wore an expensive suit I'd never seen before. Stephanie was dressed all in black, like she was in mourning. When I walked in, neither of them looked at me. Harold Brennan did, though. He looked at me the way a lion looks at an injured gazelle. The courtroom filled slowly. The jury box held 12 people, 7 women and 5 men, ranging from what looked like their 30s to their 70s. I wondered what they saw when they looked at me. A sweet grandmother? A selfish miser? Did they already have their minds made up based on appearances alone? The judge entered, and we all rose. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, Beth had told me. Fair but no nonsense. She didn't tolerate games. "We're here today in the matter of Thompson versus Thompson," Judge Morrison said. "Will counsel please state their appearances for the record?" Harold stood, smooth and confident. "Harold Brennan for the plaintiff, Your Honor." Beth stood, and I could hear her voice shake slightly. "Beth Caldwell for the defendant, Your Honor." Judge Morrison nodded. "Opening statements. Mr. Brennan, you may proceed." Harold walked toward the jury box like he owned it. His voice was warm, personable, the voice of everyone's favorite uncle. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a promise. A simple promise made by a mother to her son. Gail Thompson told her son Tyler, on multiple occasions over many years, that when he was ready to make a major life investment, she would support him financially. Tyler relied on that promise. He trusted his mother. And based on that trust, he and his wife purchased their dream home, a place where they planned to raise a family. But when the time came for Mrs. Thompson to honor her word, she refused. Not because she couldn't afford it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Thompson has over $800,000 in savings. She could easily help her son and still live comfortably, but she chose not to. She chose to break her promise, to abandon her son when he needed her most. Harold pulled out a poster board with Tyler's childhood photos. Tyler as a baby, Tyler at his father's funeral, 7 years old and crying, Tyler at his wedding, beaming with joy. This is the boy Gail Thompson raised. The boy who lost his father at age 7 and had only his mother to rely on. The boy who believed, as children do, that his mother would always be there for him. But when Tyler asked for help, when he reminded his mother of her promise, she turned her back on him, and the consequences have been devastating. Tyler's wife, Stephanie, was pregnant with Gail's first grandchild. But the stress of this situation, the anxiety, the fear, caused Stephanie to miscarry. Tyler and Stephanie lost their baby because a promise was broken. I watched several jurors' faces soften with sympathy. One woman in the front row was tearing up. Harold continued for another 10 minutes, painting Tyler as a devoted son who'd been cruelly betrayed. When he finally sat down, I felt like I'd already lost. Beth stood up for her opening statement. Her voice was quieter, less polished, but she tried her best. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard a very compelling story. But it's not the truth. The truth is that Mrs. Thompson never made a binding promise to give her son $600,000. She worked for 43 years as a high school math teacher. She raised her son alone after her husband died. She saved every penny she could, not to hoard it, but to ensure she wouldn't be a burden to anyone in her old age. She saved so she could take care of herself. That's not selfish. That's responsible. Tyler Thompson and his wife Stephanie bought an expensive beach house, a luxury property they couldn't afford, and then demanded that Mrs. Thompson pay for it. When she refused, they sued her. They're using the legal system to try to force an elderly woman to give up her life savings. That's not justice. That's exploitation. Beth's statement was good, but I could tell it didn't have the emotional punch that Harold's had. She sat down, and I squeezed her hand under the table. "Mr. Brennan, call your first witness," Judge Morrison said. The plaintiff calls Tyler Thompson to the stand. I watched my son walk to the witness stand, place his hand on the Bible, swear to tell the truth. Then he sat down and looked directly at the jury, avoiding my eyes entirely. Harold led Tyler through his testimony gently, like a caring parent. Tyler talked about his childhood, how hard it was after his father died, how his mother always seemed to be working, never had time for him, how they struggled financially, or at least how he remembered it that way. He made it sound like we'd been poverty-stricken, which wasn't true. We'd been careful, but never desperate. "And did your mother ever discuss her financial plans with you?" Harold asked. "Yes. Many times over the years. Starting when I was in college, she'd talk about how she was saving for the future, how she wanted to make sure I was taken care of when I was ready to make big life decisions. She said it was what my father would have wanted, that his life insurance money and her savings were meant to support the family, to give me opportunities." "Did she ever mention a specific amount?" "Not at first. But about 3 years ago, when Stephanie and I were talking about maybe buying property someday, I mentioned it to my mom. She said when we were ready, she could give us $600,000. She said it was about a third of what she had, and it would still leave her plenty to live on." "And did you believe her?" "Of course. She's my mother. Why would she lie to me?" "So you relied on this promise when you purchased the beach house in Hilton Head?" "Absolutely. Stephanie's parents helped with the down payment. We financed the rest, but we only bought the house because we knew my mom would help with the payments. We never would have done it otherwise." I wanted to scream that it was all lies, but I forced myself to sit still, to keep my face neutral. Beth cross-examined him, but Tyler had an answer for everything. When she asked why he didn't get the promise in writing, he said he trusted his mother. When she asked about his income, he claimed that pharmaceutical sales was unstable, and he'd been making less recently. When she asked about the letter, he said he'd kept it for years as a reminder of his mother's support but had lost the envelope. Stephanie took the stand next. She was even more effective than Tyler. She cried as she described her miscarriage. Described going to the hospital in pain, being told she'd lost the baby, Tyler holding her as she sobbed. She claimed that just before the miscarriage, she'd had a conversation with me, where I'd told her I didn't really consider her part of the family anyway, and that maybe the baby was better off not being born into this mess. I'd never said any such thing. I'd barely spoken to Stephanie since that awful dinner. But how could I prove it? There were no witnesses, no recordings. It was her word against mine. Then Harold called the college roommate, a man named Brian who claimed to remember a conversation from 15 years ago. Called my former teaching colleague, Sandra, who said I'd often talked about wanting to provide for Tyler's future. Every witness twisted normal parental statements into contractual obligations. By the time they'd finished presenting their case, I felt like I'd been buried alive. Then came the surprise witness. Harold called a forensic accountant named Mr. Harris to the stand. Mr. Harris was in his 50s, wearing thick glasses and carrying a briefcase full of documents. "Mr. Harris, you've reviewed the defendant's financial records, correct?" "Yes, I have." "And what did you find?" "Mrs. Thompson has $847,000 in total assets, This includes retirement accounts, savings, and home equity. Her monthly expenses, based on 3 years of bank statements, averaged $2,800. At that rate, even with inflation, her current assets would last approximately 25 to 30 years, well into her 90s. So she could afford to pay the $600,000 the plaintiff is requesting? Objection, Beth jumped up. The question isn't whether she can afford it, but whether she promised it. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Rephrase, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Harris, if Mrs. Thompson paid $600,000 to her son, how much would she have left? Approximately $247,000, plus her home equity and Social Security income. That would still provide her with adequate retirement income for a modest lifestyle. My heart sank. The accountant was making it sound like I could afford to give Tyler the money without real hardship. That paying $600,000 would still leave me comfortable. But what he wasn't accounting for was medical emergencies, home repairs, inflation, all the unknowns that come with aging. $247,000 might sound like a lot, but it could disappear quickly. Harold looked at the jury triumphantly. No further questions. Beth tried to cross-examine, tried to get Mr. Harris to admit his calculations were overly optimistic, but the damage was done. The jury had heard that I could afford to help and was simply choosing not to. Judge Morrison called for a recess. As we filed out of the courtroom, Beth pulled me aside. We're losing, she whispered. Badly. Every witness, every piece of evidence, it's all going against us. Unless we have something dramatic for our side, I think the jury is going to rule for Tyler. I sat on a bench in the hallway, my whole body numb. This was it. This was how I'd lose everything. Not to illness or accident or bad luck, but to my own son, using the legal system as a weapon. Beth sat next to me, flipping through her notes desperately, looking for something, anything we could use. The afternoon session was about to begin. It would be our turn to present our defense. But what defense did we have? We couldn't prove I'd never made a promise. We couldn't prove the letter was fake. We just had my word against Tyler's, and the jury had already decided who to believe. The afternoon session began with me taking the stand. My hands shook as I placed them on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. I sat in the witness chair and looked out at the courtroom, at the judge, at the jury, at Tyler, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. Beth led me through my testimony gently. I told my story. 43 years, teaching math at Lincoln High School. Raising Tyler alone after my husband died. The sacrifices, the careful budgeting, the pride I felt when Tyler graduated college. The modest retirement I'd planned. Nothing fancy, just security. The dinner where Tyler and Stephanie had demanded I pay their mortgage. My refusal. The lawsuit. Mrs. Thompson, Beth asked, did you ever promise your son $600,000? No, never. I may have said things over the years about wanting to help him someday if I could, but I never promised a specific amount, and I certainly never promised to pay a mortgage I couldn't afford. Did you write the letter that was presented as evidence? No, I've never seen that letter before this lawsuit. That's not my handwriting, or if it is, someone traced it. I never wrote those words. Do you love your son? I felt tears welling up. Of course I do. He's my only child. This whole situation breaks my heart, but loving someone doesn't mean destroying yourself financially to give them whatever they want. Beth sat down. Then Harold stood up for cross-examination. I braced myself. Mrs. Thompson, he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You've told us you love your son, but let's talk about the ways you've shown that love. When Tyler was 14 and wanted to go to a specialized computer camp, you said no because it cost $3,000, correct? I was a single mother on a teacher's salary. $3,000 was a lot of money. But you had life insurance money from your husband's death, didn't you? I used that money to keep us housed and fed and stable. You used it to save, you mean? You put much of it into investments. You could have used it to enrich Tyler's childhood, but you chose to hoard it. Objection, Beth called out. Argumentative. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Brennan. But the damage was done. Harold continued picking apart every financial decision I'd made as a parent, making me sound like a miser who'd withheld opportunities from my child. Mrs. Thompson, you currently have $847,000 in assets, correct? Yes. And you live alone in a 3-bedroom house? Yes. You drive a 10-year-old car? Yes. You haven't taken a vacation in over a decade? Correct. So you're not spending this money. You're just sitting on it, watching it grow while your son struggles. My son doesn't struggle. He makes $90,000 a year. He and Stephanie took a $50,000 vacation to Europe last year. They drive luxury cars. They're not struggling. They're entitled. Harold's face darkened. Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true that you simply don't want to share what you have? That you'd rather die with money in the bank than help your own child? That's not true. I offered to help with $10,000. But I won't commit financial suicide by taking on a mortgage that would drain my savings in just a few years. You call it financial suicide. Your son calls it family obligation. Which is it? I didn't have an answer that would satisfy him. Nothing I said would change the narrative he'd built. When I finally stepped down from the stand, I felt like I'd been torn apart. Beth called a few character witnesses, friends who testified I was a good person, responsible, hardworking. But their testimony felt weak compared to the emotional punch of Tyler and Stephanie's claims. Then Beth tried to bring up Tyler's spending habits, his multiple bank accounts, the vacation. Harold objected every time, and most of it was sustained. We couldn't prove Tyler was wealthy without access to his full financial records, which we didn't have. We were losing. I could see it on the jury's faces. They decided I was a cold, wealthy woman who was abandoning her son out of spite. Beth gave her best closing argument, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She knew we were beaten. Harold gave his closing, and it was masterful. He talked about family values, about a son's trust in his mother, about a grandmother who'd caused the death of her grandchild through her refusal to help. By the time he sat down, 3 jury members were crying. Judge Morrison was about to instruct the jury when something unusual happened. A woman entered the courtroom from the back. She was around 40, professionally dressed in a gray suit, carrying a briefcase. She walked purposefully down the center aisle and approached Beth. "Excuse me," she whispered, but in the quiet courtroom, we could all hear. "I need to speak with you immediately. It's urgent." Judge Morrison frowned. "Who are you?" The woman turned to face the judge. "Your Honor, my name is Laura Kimball. I'm a forensic accountant. I was here waiting for another case on this floor, and I happened to observe part of this trial. I have information that I believe is crucial to this case." Harold jumped up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense has rested. We're about to go to deliberation." And yet, Judge Morrison said slowly, "If Miss Kimball has relevant information, I'm inclined to hear it. Counsel, approach." Beth and Harold went to the bench. There was a whispered conference I couldn't hear. Harold was gesturing angrily. Beth looked confused but hopeful. Judge Morrison listened to them both, then made her decision. "We'll take a 30-minute recess. Miss Caldwell, you may consult with Miss Kimball. Mr. Brennan, you may prepare to respond if necessary. We reconvene at 3:30. The judge left. The jury was let out. And suddenly Laura Kimball was sitting next to me and Beth at our table, opening her briefcase. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "I'm going to help you. I recognize the accountant Harold Brennan used. His name is George Harris, and he was fired from my firm 2 years ago for falsifying documents in a divorce case. When I heard him testifying, I knew something was wrong. During the lunch break, I did some digging." She pulled out documents, spreading them across the table. Bank statements, property records, business filings. "Your son and his wife aren't struggling financially. They have over $400,000 in various accounts. Look here. This is an LLC they set up 6 months ago. It owns the beach house. They're not living there. They're renting it out as a vacation property. They're charging $12,000 a month during peak season. Look at these rental listings. They're all over vacation rental websites." I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. They wanted me to pay the mortgage while they collected rental income? Exactly. This was never about need. It was about profit. They saw an opportunity to use your money to fund an investment property that would make them money. Beth was frantically reviewing the documents. "This is incredible. But how did you get all this?" "Public records, mostly. Property ownership is public. Business filings are public. Some of the bank information came from subpoenas in a case my firm handled against Tyler's employer last year. It's all legitimate and admissible." "What about the letter?" I asked. "The one they claim I wrote?" Laura pulled out her laptop, opened it, and showed us a document analysis. The letter Harold submitted was scanned at 300 dpi. When I enhanced the scan, I found digital artifacts that suggest it was created on a computer first, then printed and traced. I traced the document metadata. It was created on a computer registered to Stephanie Brennan. She made the document, printed it, and then traced over it with a pen to make it look handwritten. "Your signature was likely copied from a card or letter you'd actually sent. It's a forgery, Mrs. Thompson." And her father knew. Harold knew. Beth looked at me with something like wonder. This changes everything. The 30 minutes passed in a blur. Beth prepared to present the new evidence. Harold was out in the hallway, pacing, making angry phone calls. When we reconvened, the tension in the courtroom was electric. "Your Honor," Beth said, standing, "the defense moves to reopen to present newly discovered evidence." Harold was on his feet immediately. "Objection. The defense has rested. This is a clear attempt to ambush the plaintiff with evidence that should have been presented earlier." "Your Honor," Beth countered, "this evidence was discovered only within the last hour. It goes directly to the heart of the plaintiff's claims and shows fraud, not just by the plaintiff, but by opposing counsel." Judge Morrison's eyes sharpened at the word fraud. "I'll allow it. But, Counselor, this had better be as significant as you claim. Miss Kimball, please take the stand." Laura Kimball was sworn in. Beth led her through her credentials. 15 years as a forensic accountant. Expert witness in over 50 cases. Impeccable reputation. Then Beth presented the documents. "Miss Kimball, what did your investigation reveal about the plaintiff's financial status?" "Tyler and Stephanie Thompson have over $400,000 in liquid assets across multiple accounts. They also own, through an LLC, the beach house in question, which they've been renting as a vacation property for $12,000 a month during peak season. Over the past 7 months, they've generated $85,000 in rental income." Gasps from the jury. Tyler's face went white. Stephanie looked like she might be sick. "So they're not financially struggling?" "No. They're quite comfortable. More comfortable than the defendant, actually." "And what about the letter allegedly written by Mrs. Thompson?" Laura explained the digital forensics, the metadata, the evidence that it was created on Stephanie's computer. The jury members were leaning forward now, completely engaged. Harold tried to cross-examine, tried to poke holes in Laura's testimony, but she was unshakable. Every answer was backed by documentation, by evidence, by expertise. "Your Honor," Beth said, "in light of this evidence, the defense moves to recall Tyler Thompson." Judge Morrison nodded grimly. "Mr. Thompson, return to the stand. You're reminded you're still under oath." Tyler walked to the witness stand like a man walking to his execution. Beth approached him with the bank statements. "Mr. Thompson, do you recognize these accounts?" Tyler barely glanced at them. "I might have some savings." "These accounts total over $400,000. Is that just some savings?" "Stephanie and we've been careful with money." "Mr. Thompson, you testified earlier that you were struggling financially, that you relied on your mother's promise because you needed the help. Was that testimony truthful?" We have expenses. The accounts don't tell the whole story." Beth pulled out the rental listings. "Is this your beach house?" "Yes." "Are you renting it out?" Tyler looked at Harold desperately. Harold was slumped in his chair, looking defeated. "We rent it sometimes." "For $12,000 a month?" "During peak season, yes." "So you wanted your mother to pay the mortgage while you collected $12,000 a month in rent?" "It's not that simple." "It seems quite simple to me, Mr. Thompson. You and your wife bought an investment property, intending to profit from it, and you wanted your elderly mother to fund it. Isn't that right? She promised us the money. Did she? Or did you and your wife create that letter to make it look like she did?" "I didn't create it. Maybe Stephanie tried to recreate what my mom said verbally, but I didn't forge anything." Beth turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the witness just admitted that the letter was fabricated." Harold was on his feet. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to consult with my clients." But it was too late. The confession was out there. Judge Morrison's face was stern, angry in a way I hadn't seen before. She held up the letter, the supposed evidence of my promise. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice cold. "I have one simple question for you." The courtroom went silent. "If your mother truly promised you this money, and you truly relied on that promise in good faith, why did you need to forge a letter to prove it?" Tyler opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Judge Morrison continued, "An innocent man doesn't falsify evidence. Your silence is your answer." She turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, in light of the evidence presented this afternoon, I'm dismissing this case with prejudice. This means it cannot be refiled. The plaintiff's claims are without merit and have been shown to be based on fabricated evidence." She turned back to Tyler and Harold. "Furthermore, I'm ordering the plaintiffs to pay the defendant's legal fees in full. Mrs. Thompson, how much have you spent defending yourself?" Beth stood. $33,000, Your Honor. The plaintiffs will reimburse that amount within 30 days. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of fraud. Mr. Thompson, Miss Brennan, you may face criminal charges for what you've done here today. Judge Morrison looked at Tyler with disgust. "I've been on this bench for 20 years. I've seen a lot of sad cases. But exploiting an elderly parent for financial gain, fabricating evidence, and attempting to use the legal system as a weapon to steal from your own mother? That's as low as it gets. Mrs. Thompson worked for over 4 decades, saved responsibly, and planned carefully for her retirement. She deserves to enjoy that retirement without predatory lawsuits from her own family." She banged her gavel. "This case is dismissed. We're adjourned." The courtroom erupted. Several jury members came over to me, apologizing for doubting me. One woman, probably in her 60s, hugged me and said, "I'm so sorry. We almost made a terrible mistake." Tyler and Stephanie rushed out without looking at me. Harold Brennan gathered his papers with shaking hands, his face red with humiliation and anger. As he left, he muttered to Beth, "This isn't over." But it was. We all knew it was. Laura Kimball packed up her laptop and turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm glad I could help. I've seen too many cases where adult children exploit their elderly parents. The law should protect people like you, not be used as a weapon against you." "I don't know how to thank you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "You already did, by standing up for yourself. That took courage." Beth was ecstatic, hugging me, barely able to contain her excitement. "We won! I can't believe we actually won." We walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon Sunday. The street was busy with rush-hour traffic, people heading home from work, living their normal lives. I stood on the courthouse steps and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Over the following days, the reality of the victory settled in. Tyler and Stephanie did pay the $33,000 in legal fees, though it came with no note, no apology. I heard through Rachel that they'd put the beach house up for sale. Whether they were scared of criminal charges or just couldn't afford it without my money, I didn't know. I didn't care. The district attorney's office did investigate, but ultimately didn't file charges. They said while the letter was likely forged, proving intent beyond a reasonable doubt would be difficult. Harold Brennan faced a complaint with the State Bar Association but wasn't disbarred. He did, however, lose his position at his firm. Apparently, being publicly humiliated for helping your daughter defraud an elderly woman doesn't look good for a law firm's reputation. Rachel called me 2 weeks after the trial, crying and apologizing. She said she'd talked to Tyler, who'd admitted the whole thing. She felt terrible for not believing me, for not supporting me. I forgave her. What else could I do? Holding grudges only hurts the person holding them. Several of my friends from church reached out, apologizing for how they'd treated me. Patricia, my former teaching colleague, brought me flowers and a card that said, "I should have trusted you. Forgive me." My book club invited me back. Agnes from down the street baked me a pie. People wanted to make amends now that they knew the truth. But Tyler? I haven't heard from him since the trial. Not a word, not an apology, nothing. And that's the part that hurts the most. I won the case, kept my money, proved I wasn't the monster they'd painted me to be. But I lost my son. Or maybe I never really had him in the first place. Maybe the boy I thought I'd raised had never existed. Maybe he'd always been someone who saw people, even his own mother, as resources to be exploited. I think about him sometimes, usually late at night when sleep won't come. I wonder if he ever feels guilty, If he ever lies awake thinking about what he did. If he misses me. Part of me hopes he does. Part of me hopes he doesn't, because that would mean he's not worth missing. But I've learned to focus on what I do have, instead of what I've lost. I have my home, paid for with my own hard work. I have my savings, still intact, still protecting my future. I have friends who stood by me, and friends who came back when they learned the truth. I have my health, mostly, though the stress took its toll. I have my freedom. And I've learned some things I wish I'd known earlier in life. I learned that your savings aren't selfish. They're survival. Every dollar I put away wasn't me being greedy. It was me being smart, being responsible, being an adult who understood that the world doesn't take care of you just because you need it to. I learned that saying no doesn't make you cruel. It makes you wise. For so many years, I felt guilty every time I said no to Tyler. No, we can't afford that camp. No, I can't buy you a car. No, I can't pay for your entire college tuition. I thought saying no made me a bad mother. But saying no taught Tyler to work, to save, to be self-sufficient. Or it should have. The fact that he turned out entitled and manipulative isn't because I said no too often. It's because somewhere along the way, he decided he deserved things he hadn't earned. I learned that real family doesn't manipulate or threaten. When Tyler said family helps family, he wasn't talking about family. He was talking about exploitation. Real family supports each other without demanding the sacrifice of someone's entire security. Real family respects boundaries. Real family doesn't sue you when you can't give them everything they want. I learned that you don't owe anyone your security, not even your children. I spent Tyler's whole life putting him first. I sacrificed vacations, new clothes, entertainment, everything to make sure he had opportunities. But there comes a point where you have to put on your own oxygen mask first. I'm 67 years old. I don't have decades to rebuild if I lose everything. My security has to come first now, and that's not selfish. That's survival. I learned that love shouldn't cost everything you have. If someone's love is conditional on you bankrupting yourself for them, it's not love. It's a transaction. Tyler didn't love me. He loved what he thought he could get from me. And when I couldn't give it to him, the love disappeared. Real love persists, even when the money doesn't. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself, even against family, isn't betrayal. It's self-respect. For months, I felt guilty. I questioned whether I should have just given Tyler the money to preserve the relationship, but that would have been teaching him that threats and manipulation work. That if he pushed hard enough, used the legal system, lied and fabricated evidence, he could get whatever he wanted. Standing up for myself wasn't just protecting my money. It was standing up for what's right. I'm back in my modest home now, the same house I almost lost. I've planted new flowers in my garden, roses and daisies and black-eyed Susans. I sit on my back porch in the evenings with a cup of tea and watch the sun set. I've started that watercolor painting class I mentioned, meeting every Thursday at the community center. I'm not very good at it yet, but I'm learning. I'm planning a small trip next spring, nothing extravagant, maybe Asheville to see the mountains, just something for me. Last week, I went to Tyler's old room, the one I've kept exactly as it was when he moved out for college. His baseball trophies, his high school yearbooks, photos of us together when he was young. I packed it all in boxes and donated most of it to charity, kept a few photos, the good memories. Then I repainted the room a cheerful yellow and turned it into an art studio. It was time to stop living in the past, stop holding space for a relationship that doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes I think about what my husband would say if he were here. Would he be proud of me for standing up for myself? Or disappointed that I let it get to the point where my own son sued me? I like to think he'd understand, that he'd put his arm around me and say, "You did the right thing, Gail. You protected yourself. You protected what we built together." The truth is, I don't know if Tyler will ever apologize. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again, and I've made peace with that. I raised him the best I could with what I had. I loved him, provided for him, gave him every opportunity I could afford. If that wasn't enough for him, if he needed me to destroy myself financially to prove my love, then there was nothing I could do that would ever be enough. I worked too hard for too long to let guilt steal my future. 43 years of teaching teenagers algebra, geometry, calculus. 43 years of grading papers at night and attending parent-teacher conferences and sponsoring the math club. 43 years of careful budgeting and sacrifice and planning. That work matters. That sacrifice matters. And protecting it doesn't make me a bad mother. It makes me a survivor. I'm 67 years old, and I'm finally learning to put myself first. Not in a selfish way, but in a healthy way. To recognize that my needs matter, that my security matters, that I have value beyond what I can provide to others. It's a lesson I wish I'd learned earlier, but better late than never. So to anyone listening who's facing pressure from family to give up their security, who's being told they're selfish for protecting what they've earned, who's being manipulated and threatened and made to feel guilty, I want you to know this. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your savings are not selfish. Your boundaries are not cruel. And if someone truly loves you, they won't ask you to destroy yourself to prove it. Stand up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's family, even when it costs you relationships. Because at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. And I'd rather live with myself knowing I had the courage to say no than spend my last years in poverty, regretting that I let fear and guilt make my decisions for me. I spent 43 years teaching math to teenagers. But it took my 67th year to learn the most important equation of all. Your value isn't measured by what you give away. It's protected by what you keep. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced pressure from family to give up your financial security? How did you handle it? Did you stand your ground or give in? What would you do in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's going through something similar. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about boundaries and family and what we owe to each other, please hit that like button. It helps others find this story who might need to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself, about choosing your own well-being, about finding strength when life gets hard, please subscribe. There are so many stories out there of people who faced impossible choices and found the courage to choose themselves. Finally, share this story with someone who might need it. Maybe you know someone being pressured by family. Maybe you know someone who feels guilty for protecting their security. Send them this story. Let them know they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me through the hardest time of my life. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're facing, you find the courage to stand up for yourself. You deserve security. You deserve peace. You deserve to be treated with respect by the people who claim to love you. Take care of yourselves and remember, real family lifts you up. It doesn't tear you down. And anyone who tries to take everything from you isn't family. They're just someone wearing a family mask. Be well, be strong, and know your worth.